Genome sequencing is happening in a lot of places. We felt that all of this was happening in silos all over the place. And if you personally get genome sequenced, it could be by a research project, it could be by your doctor, it could be through a direct consumer company. And there was no one thinking about how do we link all of these together in a way that helps the participant or the patient to get better analysis and research outcomes and care based on their genetics.
Hey everybody, this week I am joined by Patrick Short, founder and CEO of Sano Genetics. Patrick, welcome. Oh, you're also, I should say, the host of the Genetics Podcast as well. So welcome to the Healthtech Podcast. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing good. My pleasure, and appreciate the invitation. It's great to be here.
So whereabouts are you speaking to us from today, Patrick?
I'm actually in London. Normally I'm based in Cambridge, UK, but I'm down here for the day. So I'm dialing in from our investors' office. Actually, they, believe it or not, have a podcast studio here. I normally record from home, but I'm here today, so it worked out perfectly.
I was going to say your audio quality is delightful. So Patrick, the first question I'll ask on these is you tell your story. Obviously, a lot of a career goes into, or a lot of learning goes into becoming a founder, and everything that you've done since with Sano Genetics. You've also hit what could only be described as a bit of a purple patch with Sano Genetics. So congratulations for that. But I'm interested in your story. So I'm interested in the lead up to it. How does one amass the scientific knowledge, the business knowledge, the confidence, everything that goes into becoming a founder? And dare I say it, a very successful podcast host too, although I kind of know that one a little bit more. But yeah, Patrick, go ahead, mate. You tell your story.
Yeah, I think you know them both, honestly. So we'll turn the mic around on you at some point. But it's a good question, nice one to reflect on. So my academic background is in genetics, although actually before that I studied math. So I studied math at university and biology. I had a physics professor that told me that there was this thing called genome sequencing, and it was really interesting, and you should check it out. That was in kind of 2010, 2011. And at that time, genome sequencing was getting much less expensive. If you've ever seen the graphs, genome sequencing became cost-effective at a rate faster than computers, basically. So we're all probably familiar with Moore's Law and how quickly things went from spaceships to cell phones and all the increases in computational power. But genome sequencing has done that even faster. And he was saying at the time, look, there's this interesting thing and they need mathematicians. There's a lot of data getting generated. So that got me interested from a academic perspective. But I also had a family connection. As long as I can remember, we've had a rare kidney disease in my family. So my dad's side of the family, my dad, my uncle, their dad, their uncle have all had kidney transplants in middle age. And we'd been in all kinds of research projects. And I can tell this story a little bit later, but until relatively recently, we had no idea what was behind the family kidney disease. And it was a topic of conversation all the time because we had family members donating kidneys to other family members. We ran out at one point, so we had to look into the extended family. So I had I guess an early upfront and personal look at rare diseases, and also the fact that I think every family has something going on, whether it's cancer or dementia or kidney disease or something that happens in childhood. And I suppose the two of those together, I had that personal interest already peaked in genetics. And based on the way it moved around in our family tree, I was pretty sure there was something genetic going on. We just hadn't figured it out. And then I got academically interested, so that's what I studied in uni, and then I moved over. You can probably tell I'm American, not British, but I've lived in Cambridge for about 10 years. So I moved over to Cambridge to do my PhD at a place called the Sanger Institute, which is a big genome sequencing institute, one of the 3 places in the world that's responsible for the vast majority of doing the human genome sequence in the early 2000s. I did my PhD focused on rare pediatric diseases, so kids with neurodevelopmental disorders, part of a really groundbreaking project in the UK called Deciphering Developmental Disorders that was started by a group of doctors and genetics researchers across the UK. The one that I worked with, who was one of the really 4 people who was leading this project, is Matt Hurls. He's now the head of the human genetics department there, but he was a very, very successful human genetics researcher, but was involved in a number of these really groundbreaking projects in the UK that kind of make the UK a very special place to do genetics research for ever since the discovery of the double helix by Watson and Crick and Rosalind Franklin. The UK has always been a great place for genomics, but in the past couple of decades, there's been a lot of investment through the NHS as well in big projects to look about how can we use genetics to better diagnose rare diseases. So that's been, my personal and professional focus for a long time. And while I was working in that group, I really enjoyed research. Actually, I wasn't one of those people that did a PhD and said like, oh, I'll never do this again. I really loved the basic science, and I loved asking those big, interesting questions that can take you years to figure out. And I did enjoy that. But I also felt like there's a whole world out there of applying this science to really help people in a more concrete way than sometimes publishing papers and things doesn't. And I've been surrounded by a lot of great and talented scientists, entrepreneurs, my PhD supervisor being one of them. He started a company called Congenica, which is in the genetic space. And then I worked with another researcher who is more in the 3D printing space, but in undergrad. So I always saw scientists that were comfortable spinning out ideas, starting companies out of their lab. And I consider myself very fortunate for that, because actually a lot of people, they're very shaped by their academic mentors. And if they say, you can only do basic science, you can only do academics, and that's your world, then you can sometimes fail to look out and see if there's something else that might be interesting for you. But I always found it interesting, and also had encouraging mentors around me to try it out. So I decided to start Sano to try to solve, I guess, a problem on both of those sides of the equation, both the researcher and the patient or participant side that my family was on. And it was, how do we make taking part in genetics research a lot easier, a lot more valuable for participants? How do we give something back to them? And there's a lot of answers to how you do this, but it comes down to making it easier to take part. How can we make it digital entirely through your computer or phone if possible, doing testing at home? So we do all of that through the platform to help run studies entirely from participants' homes. But it goes also beyond that. And how do you give real value back to people? Scientific research can be a long game sometimes, and it takes many years to get a result, but that doesn't mean that participants should get nothing out of taking part. How do we make it easy to give people their results back so that they can take those results and do something that might help them or their family straight away? And basically what we thought is every researcher around the world, whether they're in clinical trials, whether they're in basic research like I did in my PhD, everyone's trying to reinvent this wheel of how do we run a successful research study, all the nuts and bolts of getting samples back and forth, giving participants a great experience, that maybe we could design a platform and design software first and foremost that would make running these kind of studies a lot easier, so the scientists could focus on the science and leave those logistics to a platform provider like us. And the end goal of this is actually to just develop medicines and breakthroughs more quickly. If we can make it faster, we can make it more cost effective, then we have an opportunity to just lower the cost of entry to achieving some of these breakthroughs, which ultimately is what rare disease families like mine and many others are looking for.
That's an incredible whistle-stop tour. You as a researcher and you as an entrepreneur, you called it out yourself. You wanted to apply it. It's not just about publishing papers. You being very fortunate to have seen that side of the world gave you that framework to be like, oh, it's possible. Like, I can lean into this because I'm interested in it and all that sort of stuff. But you did say you also did enjoy the research. Like, you did actually enjoy that stuff. So I guess not a question I ask very often on here, but like, how would your friends describe you? Like, what sort of person are you? Why was it that you could enjoy the research and enjoy the entrepreneurship? What is it in both of those endeavors that you were enjoying? What is it that nourishes you in both? Is it the pursuit of, I don't know, greatness? Is it the pursuit of learning something new? Is it creating something in the world? Like, what is it that's driving you?
I think it's probably curiosity is the driving force. Because I remember thinking about the decision to decide to start a company rather than continuing on the academic research route. And one of the things that was most appealing to me was the unknown, and also the fact that I was going to get to learn so much about so many things that you don't learn in academic basic science research, how to manage people, how to build a team, how to build a business, right? They don't teach you anything But what doing a PhD does teach you is how to problem solve, how to ask good questions, how to go after an interesting problem and be really curious. And actually a lot of those things you can apply to building a business, but not everything. So probably curiosity is a big driving force. I think the other one is I really do want to do something good and important with my time. When I was studying for when I was doing math originally, you can go into banking, and no disrespect to any bankers out there. I think everybody should do what they're happy with. But I felt like I wanted to spend my time on something that could really have a positive impact. And I know it's something that everybody says, but I think with both research or starting a company, if you start the right company, then you can really have a big impact, and you can often have a much bigger impact than doing research, because companies scale in a way that research doesn't necessarily scale as much.
I want to talk to you about generating ideas, or the idea for Sano Genetics more specifically. I think I've done a lot of episodes of this now, and you've probably done similar with your podcast too. That I think one of the major things that I've learned, and I was talking about this in a talk I did the other day, is that ideas don't just come to you out of nowhere. And actually, so particularly in health tech and biotech, it is the result of staring at the same thing for weeks, months, years, interacting with that thing, interacting with all the things ancillary to that thing and adjacent to that thing, and you get this deep understanding of this really complex area, and only then do you spot a gap. And I think it's interesting because there's a lot of, I think, pressure on people to have the idea, in inverted commas. I actually think it requires a lot more work than that. It's not something that just comes to you, but that's empowering, because actually now it's a problem you can solve with time and effort. I just need to put the time and effort into learning a sector well enough to spot a gap. And I think that's a really important message. And I think it comes out in what the story you've just told, because my God, you've done degrees, you've done PhD, you've stared at the wall for so long, and you've gone, oh, there's a crack I could fill in, and actually I could do this way better than when it was put up. So, talk to me about the development of the idea, because the solution that you've developed has got quite a few facets to it. Actually, it's a problematic area, full stop, that actually has quite a few things that you could do. That you've decided to do things in a certain way, pretty much trying to end-to-end solve a problem, I guess, with the lowest hanging fruit. But jargon aside, all my mixed metaphors there, talk to me about generating the idea and starting a company.
Yeah. So I think I got two hopefully interesting points to make here. The first is like the kind of problem that you go after. I really like problems that are sort of, I've heard somebody describe them this way as like fractal before, where when you solve one problem, more emerge. It's not a simple problem. And our company mission is to try to accelerate the world's transition to personalized medicine. And that's there's a million ways you could do that. It's a major problem. If the problem I would describe is there are 7,000 diseases, and 95% of them don't have any treatment or cure, right? 7,000 genetic diseases. And so that's a massive problem. And there's no single answer to that. And as soon as you solve one aspect of it, 3 or 4 more emerge. And I like those because we're going to be busy. It's important. And if we make any progress with solving it, it'll be great. But we're also going to be busy for a long time. We just have to figure out which sub problems to tackle. But interestingly, there's a very funny story to how the origin story of Sano, which was my, I have 2 co-founders, Will and Charlotte, and Will and I met first, and we met because we ran into each other at all sorts of different, we were both students at Cambridge. He was studying computer science and machine learning. I was doing genetics, and he and I kept running into each other at events, but like really varied events. We had a crypto meetup. We had an entrepreneur meetup. We had a feminist roundtable, and we kept running into each other. We said, I think we need to be friends, because this is the 5th like totally orthogonal event we'd run into each other at. And so we became friends. And then one of the entrepreneurship society competitions every year at Cambridge was called 100 pounds for 100 words. And you had to submit a 100-word idea, and the judges would select the ones they liked the best and give you 100 pounds if you were the winner. And they had something like 20 winners, but they had no cap on the number of ideas you could put in. So Will and I shut ourselves in a room for an entire day, and we literally came up with like 30 ideas, just anything. Brilliant. Because it's 100 words, and we won like 12 of the 20 awards or something like that. So because it was not named, they would say the idea, and they had no cap. So they changed the rule after that year, and they started requiring it to be named. You could only pick one, and it was just cash. So we got whatever, 1,200 pounds cash or whatever it was. But importantly, one of those ideas was kind of the kernel for what we would eventually do. And some of the ideas were, they were never things that we were actually going to build a business around, because we had no real knowledge of the space. And what's interesting about startups is that you have stories from both perspectives, either the person who does stare at the wall and really knows the space and then can solve it, but then you also sometimes have complete outsiders that just look at it differently. And I think that's cool too, because it means you can always bring a fresh look to something. But one of the ideas did definitely lean into our strengths and the areas we knew a lot about. And it was around solving this problem of how do we make drugs, and not just drugs, how do we make treatments more personalized? How do we get towards predictive and preventive medicine rather than reactive? And then we germinated on that idea for a long time, and they change as you go. You have an idea of how you might solve it, but it changes. But that was really the origin of this kind of ridiculous cash grab that we went for as master.
I'll tell you what, if there's ever a marker of how innovative a person is, I think there's probably a 100% success rate of calling someone innovative if they've entered a competition that the competition owners had to then change the rules after they entered. That certainly points to your innovative nature. Second reason I love that story, Patrick, is that you didn't meet your co-founder based on a load of different meetups around science. Actually, it was lots of different things. You were similar people on a similar journey of exploration, similarly. And I love that, because you weren't fixed in what you were doing. You were open and you were exploring, but also about values as well. You found someone that aligned with your values because you saw them at a feminist roundtable, which is really interesting, because now this person actually aligns with my values. I could work with them. And you'll know as well as I do that co-founder relationships are a special type of relationship that require so much more than complementary skills and just what you can see on paper as complementary skills. It is a 10-year or longer relationship with people often that you need to be aligned on more things. And that's why I absolutely love the fact you're aligned on values. Tell me about your other co-founder.
So myself, Will, and Charlotte, and we've all been friends from the outset. And I think it does really go a long way. So Charlotte, Will, and I were all at the same college, St. Edmunds in Cambridge, which was known for being the poorest and the most international of colleges. I had a great time there. And you're right. I mean, we connected on not just an interest in entrepreneurship and science and starting a company. So Charlotte studied pediatric oncology and cell biology. So we were all in this computational biology kind of space. And we also had similar life experiences that led us to want to try to solve this problem on a personal level. I think, there are also companies that get started by people who meet in an incubator, and 6 weeks later, they're starting a company together. But I think it's really risky, because you go through, people can tell you that you're going to go through a lot, but you really do, ups and downs, all the stuff that they tell you that you're going to have to deal with when you start a company, you end up having to deal with. And it's really important to have people that you enjoy working with, and that you also feel like at the end of the day, you can trust them, and you can really go into a 10-year relationship and not look back, because those kind of people are really hard to find in life. So when you find them, you got to hang on.
So you got around £1,200 from winning your competitions. You select an idea that you want to run with. £1,200. You can't really announce that as a pre-seed round, although I'm sure it would be quite amusing if you tried. But you must then go. You need then something to go and start a biotech company, right? So bridge that gap for me. What happens next, very practically? Of you leave that room, you've got 1,200 quid, and now you think, okay, now we want to go and do it. What do you do?
Yeah, well, that 1,200 quid was not actually tied to the company. No company had even been formed yet. So they specifically structure the competition this way, where for the £100 for 100 words, it's just cash. You do whatever you want with it. And my wife will tell you that I put it in an index fund and saved it, because that's just how I am. But my portion of
it's worth £6,000 now. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I put it in Tesla, and I'm sure it's doing fine. I actually don't remember where I put it, but definitely an index fund. She'll also tell you that I'm the luckiest person in the world, because I enter in these kind of competitions all the time, but I only enter in the ones that I'm pretty sure I can win. So it's a kind of,
excellent.
If you ever read, there's an article called The Four Types of Luck. I think it's really worth a Google for anybody who doesn't know it. If you think of somebody as lucky, there's luck. You make a lot of luck, how often you get yourself out there and do things. But anyways, I'm digressing on your actual question, which is how we started the company. We entered in a later competition, probably about a year later, that was for £5,000 with the actual idea. And we had to put together a whole business plan. And to accept that money, you do have to incorporate a company. So we incorporated at that point, but all three of us were still in the middle of our PhDs. I had about a year and a half to go, and Will and Charlotte were earlier on. So they had 2 and 3 years respectively. About a year later, we made the decision that we were going to work on the company full time. And as you know, no venture capitalists invest in 3 part-time PhD students without at least some indication that they're going to go full-time. And we had decided that we were going to at that point anyways. And Will and Charlotte, to their massive credit, decided they were going to stop doing their PhDs and work on the company full-time, which is not an easy thing to do, because, people on an academic path, often it's very difficult to take yourself out of that kind of thing, but they decided that this was what they wanted to do. And timing wise, I was able to finish mine and started basically the next day.
Do you think that was the gravity of the opportunity, or was that a different reason? Why do you think that was? Because let's not brush over that. That's a huge decision. You got to explain that to your parents at some point, or your spouse. That's right. That's interesting.
Yeah, depending on parents, it could go down very differently. But no, I think they felt like it was how they really wanted to spend their time. And
good for them.
If it's 6 months or something to finish, then maybe you make the argument of, look, stick it out and get the degree. But if it's 2 years, then you got to do what you really, how you really think you're gonna want to spend the time. So and I always bring it up because I think it's a massive credit to them, because it's very easy to just follow the path, follow the safe path, but they definitely didn't in that case. Well, I was finishing up my PhD. I was kind of writing up actually at the time, and then raising our pre-seed round. It was a little bit of a funny time now thinking about it. I was writing my thesis from a cafe during the day, and then at night I was working on pitch decks and things. But we had our first. We really didn't know how to fundraise at all, as you don't if it's your first time and you're just kind of doing your thing. So we Googled some of the. We knew that there were VCs in Cambridge that we knew, and we Googled some of the good ones in London. And Charlotte actually found Seed Camp, who ultimately led our pre-seed round. And we filled out a form on their website. Here's the idea. Here's who we are. Here's what we want to do. And they were our very first check-in, and they've always been amazing to work with. But from I was amazed actually at how also quickly and with so much conviction they were able to back us. We had no experience starting a company. We were first timers, and but I think they liked the idea. They saw the potential that we had. There was a lot happening in genomics and life sciences. I think venture capitalists could see that this was an industry that had been relatively untouched by software and AI and all of these major waves to come. And so Tom and Reshma and Carlos were the partners mainly that we met with over there, and they've been amazing. Anyone who's thinking about raising pre-seed or seed round, would recommend them very highly, because they just are. You really want someone who knows the ups and downs of building a company to be with you from that early stage. It's investors are important and can help you at every stage, but in the beginning, like, you really want somebody who can help you figure out which way to go and what to do when you're stuck. And they've always been that way for us, and that's I think that's getting more common. There's great investors in London and in the US, but you just really want to make sure you've got good ones at the beginning.
How did you see the business model back then, in the kind of early idea when you were drawing on that whiteboard for the first time? What was the diagram you drew initially? And then I guess fast forward to today and fill us in on what you're doing today and if that differs.
Yeah, there definitely have been some differences and some pivots along the way. So the vision in the beginning, which is still, the vision in the beginning, which is still largely the vision today, is that genome sequencing is happening in a lot of places. It's happening in the healthcare system. It's happening in big, we call them biobanks, big population scale programs like the UK Biobank, or Genomics England is a government, backed genome sequencing program here in the UK. And there's equivalent ones in every country on earth. We felt that all of this was happening in silos all over the place. And if you personally get genome sequenced, it could be by a research project, it could be by your doctor, it could be through a direct consumer company like 23andMe. And there was no one thinking about how do we link all of these together in a way that helps the participant or the patient to get better analysis and research outcomes and care based on their genetics. And there was also no one linking it together for the researchers to say, hey, you're looking for this group of people, but they're spread out all over the place because people are getting sequenced by all these different providers. So our original vision was, how do we use software to stitch all these things together and make sure that if you're running a research study, you can get access to the world's genome sequenced population. And then if you're an individual, that you can get access to the world's research in a way that's secure and private and is ethically above board and gives you the best possible options for yourself. And that's broadly what we're still trying to do today. I think the way we've gone about it has changed a little bit from the beginning in some minor ways, but also some major ways. I think the biggest ones have been how important the clinical trial sector has been for us, because that is where the vast majority of new medicines every new medicine has to go through clinical trials to prove it's safe and to prove it works. And as a small company, you really need to find somewhere that you can have an impact immediately and really, to get to that big vision that I described of how do we link together the world's, genomic data in a way that accelerates progress for everybody. You have to start somewhere a little bit more practical, normally as a small company. And for us, the thing that we found pretty early on where there was a real concrete problem to solve was, how do we do that, but within the context of patients that need to get access to clinical trials and clinical trials that need to get access to patients, and making it easier for people to either get testing if they don't have it, or to reuse that existing genetic data if it's already been generated, has become, the first act, or really the core focus for us. But we still do a lot of other work in early stage research and other aspects of that, and healthcare focused genetics, other aspects of that kind of bigger vision that I described.
Nice. It would be remiss of me not to mention everything that's going on with 23andMe at the minute as an obvious sort of comparison. You guys obviously different in the way that you execute and your business model and all the rest of it. For people listening that obviously they know genome sequencing, they know that you can do a blood test and get something back and someone's going to tell me what to do. They might have heard of 23andMe. What's your take on what has happened? Because I guess for context, they listed, their share price just tanked, their revenues have dropped. Is it as simple as, well, you can only get a genetic test once and they just didn't have a model beyond that? Is it more complex than that? Like, What's your read on it, and how does that sort of play with what you guys do? Because I imagine investors and all sorts of people are asking the same questions. You guys have just done an incredible raise. I imagine you got asked this question because, like, how would you not if someone was investing in you? So yeah, maybe talk to me about 23andMe and or your investment journey, actually, if that ties in. But yeah, I'm really interested in like what's been going on recently for you guys in this space.
Yeah, definitely. Let me start with 23andMe because I think they're really interesting and have been a trailblazing company for a long time. I think the business model has been very challenged. So I think you described part of the problem well, which is from the outset, their bread and butter has always been direct to consumer genome sequencing. You can buy a saliva test, you can get your ancestry, you can get some health markers, and it's done with a relatively low cost. Really, the first generation of mass market genome sequencing or genomic analysis tools is called an array, and they do something called array sequencing, which is different from a whole genome or a whole exome that companies like us typically do. So the array can tell you a lot about your ancestry, about common health risks, but I think you diagnosed the problem partially, which is the consumer market for these things is not infinite. There was data as early as 2019 that showed that every direct-to-consumer genetics company was, I think it was maybe Christmas of 2019, they normally see really big bumps in their sales, but none of them saw the bump that they expected. And the writing was on the wall that most of the low-hanging fruit of consumers who really wanted to learn about their ancestry had probably bought the test. And companies like Ancestry.com had more sustainable business models in that they had lots of other subscription-based tools like old archive finders and things like this, that if you were really a hardcore genealogist, then you can get a lot from something like Ancestry.com. And I think 23andMe got a little bit stuck in the middle where they really did a good job almost defining the direct-to-consumer market, but then the legs ran out a little bit when they got to most consumers, and competition heated up as well. I also think we shouldn't write off 23andMe too prematurely because they have a big part of their plan for years and that they've been executing on has been actually to develop drugs out of the genetic database they've built. Yeah, they have an oncology drug that's about to go into phase 2. And I think we'll see. I mean, if they get successful results from that, maybe there is a phoenix rising from the ashes kind of moment where they can turn what's been a pretty challenging last couple of years into a act 2 for the company as a drug discovery and development platform. I think that's still TBD, but more broadly speaking, suppose that doesn't work and the company continues to have its issues financially. I think there's a couple things to learn from them for companies like us. One is the broad consumer focus with really shallow data, in that it's just it's just your saliva test basically. That doesn't get you a very long way towards developing precision medicines. You need multimodal data. You also need lots of types of you need depth within an individual patient population. So if you're developing a drug for Parkinson's disease, you'd rather have tens of thousands of people with that disease that you could really heavily characterize than a really broad population. And I think over time, more and more healthcare systems are going to compete with 23andMe in a way that they're going to generate these kind of large scale data sets on a population level. So, I think that's part of the equation. I think the other part is it's hard to pivot a business model like that when you're at scale. They were really set up to do, millions of direct to consumer genetic tests a year. And these other things like drug discovery and development, you want to build a company from the outset to kind of solve those sorts of problems. And we've always been focused on the research and development market rather than selling consumer tests. And so I think it's different skill sets, a different go-to-market. And then maybe the last thing that I'll say is that they've built all their tools in-house and their strategy is to use the genetic data they've generated to develop their own drugs, which I think maybe, as I said before, a viable strategy. We're trying to do almost the opposite, which is to build software that allows everybody in the world to make use of that kind of best-in-class participant experience, researcher experience, and think about how that scales to everybody, not just to one company. But there have been a lot of there have been a lot of issues in biotech and health tech in the last couple of years. So I think it's really important to be aware of, and something as simple as debt can drag. There's a couple of companies that have been dragged down recently because they took on a ton of debt in the free money era, and then it's it's floating interest rates, and now if you combine that with a slowdown in sales, you have a big problem that takes an otherwise innovative business and makes it really difficult to operate.
The perfect storm. You guys raised money in and amongst this story. You were the real kind of like flip side of the coin. Made some great hires, like Paul, etc. Like really interesting time for you guys. The one hand I'm reading about 23andMe and that the business model doesn't work, and on the other hand I'm seeing like story after story of you guys raising and hiring and making these incredible people part of your team and stuff. It really shows like the value of business model, doesn't it? Like, honestly, like it's the same space, a similar space, albeit you guys are, I'd argue, broader and certainly broader appeal and more diversified with your revenue and customers, etc. But yeah, tell me about the raise, man. Like, congratulations.
No, thank you. It was it's great to partner with great investors, and actually, there's an interesting story behind this one, which is we weren't actively fundraising, but the investor who led our round is a partner named Karina Namey at a new fund called Plural that was started by the TransferWise founder, Wise founder, cool, and a number of other very successful European entrepreneurs. And they wanted to start the fund for founders by founders. The kind of fund that they wish they had was kind of the pitch. And they've really delivered. I mean, they've been incredible. I did reference calls of them when I was trying to figure out if we would go ahead. And I never heard somebody talk about a venture capital fund in the way that some of the people did. They were really rolling their sleeves up and helping. And I've had experience working with Karina before as well, because she led our round out of episode 1 for our seed round. And so it was a really nice return to the board story for her as well, where she led the round from episode 1. She left to join Plural.
Just out of interest, Patrick, a lot of VCs talk about being founder first, like a lot. When you were doing those reference calls, what was it exactly where you said, like, they delivered? What were you hearing? The reason I ask is because there will be lots of entrepreneurs listening that they're seed, they're A, they're B, they have multiple investors that they could go to. Like, that is obviously a glowing recommendation of this fund in particular, but what were you asking in those reference calls specifically, and what was it that convinced you of like, no, they actually are?
I'd also, since I'd worked with Karina previously, I had a good sense of what she was going to be like. Okay. But what I heard on the reference calls were like, oh, they helped me hire this key person, and they literally they called everyone that they knew, and they literally hired this person for me. Or they, there was an AI company that I spoke to that they got put in touch with. This was back when it was kind of hard to get access to some of the up and coming models, and they had great connections somewhere that got them access to an early developer version of new models. And I would say, I mean, we've had a great investor experience all around. So I mentioned Seed Camp already, who were tremendous. Episode 1 led our seed round. MMC led our Series A. So prior to this round from Plural, I had great experience with them as well. And the things that I really look for from investors are like, they're all good at different things, and you want to try to channel the energies of what they're good at and can really help you with. So we've got, for our main board member at episode 1, Paul McNabb, ran major enterprise sales for a long time. And so he knows more, he's forgotten more things than I know about how to run and build large sales organizations. And anytime I have a problem there, I talk to him. He's also a great storyteller and fundraiser, and he knows how later stage funds work. So I found him to be really helpful to work on early versions of the pitch, figure out how to tell it in a way that is scientific enough, but not doesn't get too in the weeds. And Charlotte and Bruce at MMC have also been really helpful from a hiring perspective. Like, they've got great networks with people who've scaled businesses, can put you in touch with good people at all different stages. And they're a little bit later stage than episode 1. So they've seen companies that go to all the way to IPO and exit and those kind of things. So they have a good sense of how to build a company that really scales. So there's no one investor that's going to do everything for you, but the thing that I think honestly really separates them is whether they roll their sleeves up and really help with things and are there if you need them. They'll actually ask, can I do A, B, and C to help you versus, just kind of, like you said, say that they're founder friendly or whatever, and then don't actually deliver on it. But we've had, and my point earlier about making sure you get really good investors in the beginning is so important because it's a feedback loop, negative or positive. You start with really good investors, then they help you find and vet the next ones that are going to be really good as well. Whereas if you start with a not so good foundation, then I think it can only get, it doesn't often get better from there. So yeah, I think it's really important. It's really important. It's
funny when you said, that particular investor, I'm sure a lot of them, if they're founders turned investors, that they've forgotten or they've already forgotten more than you currently know. It's so funny because I feel so consistently humbled by being a founder, a co-founder. The fact that we're growing means that every time we've done a significant bit of growth, I've never run a company that size before. I've never run a company with that extra hire or function before. I've never managed a CFO before. I've never every big step is followed by, oh, thank God we've hired them. And then, oh, I've got no clue how to manage them. I've got no clue what can I even ask this person? Or I'm being very specific on a few of those things, but I find myself being so consistently humbled by constantly being in the bit I don't know, which is in part a great thing because it shows that we're growing, but in part also I'm consistently in the unknown to a huge degree. And some days I wish it was far less, and some days it is. Some days we plateau, some days, weeks, months are less growth than others. But it trends that way, and so does my feeling of ineptitude, inability to do things, and lack of confidence, etc. But I'm interested in your journey and how you found it.
Yeah, that's what that kind of upskilling thing is something that great investors I found can really help you with. And the way to do it is just ask them. You've never managed a CFO before. You're hiring one. Ask them to introduce you to the 4 best CFOs that they know, and just meet with those people and ask them what makes someone in position great? What kind of questions should I ask the interview? How do you like to be managed? Those kind of things, and just, getting access to those people and being able to ask those questions, I found helps you go a really long way towards just guessing, right? What questions do you ask a product leader in an interview? Rather than trying to guess that, why don't I just talk to 4 that that people I trust say are really great and see what I can learn from them.
How do you find being a founder broadly? What sort of leader are you? Do you enjoy leadership? Do you enjoy most of the job?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do. I love seeing teams of people accomplish stuff together. And I think that's one of the things that you get at all levels, but especially as you grow, it becomes more and more about how do we combine different types of people, skill sets, and figure out how we get 1 + 1 = 3. I also really like I like learning new things. At every stage, you've got to learn, that we were just talking about it with hiring new types of people. But I think especially early on, the job of the founder is to learn to be 70 or 80% as good at almost everything the company needs. You need to learn a little marketing, you need to learn a little product, you need to learn sales, and you need to learn enough to figure out how do we get to the next level, and then how do I find the person who knows 100% or 110% that can take over and help us get to that next level. But I've really enjoyed just learning enough to be dangerous about every aspect. And I think that satisfies the curiosity definitely to some degree, to kind of try to get in and see how much can you learn in 2 or 3 months, and then figure out after that what you need to do for the business to actually scale, because it can't scale by you just being a jack of all trades and being 70% good at everything.
Absolutely. But one of those things that you obviously learned on the marketing side is podcasting. And so you've obviously had your podcast for a long time, just as I've had this one for quite a long time. How has it been with your podcast? Talk to me about the podcast.
Yeah, and I can't even take credit for that. Our first marketing manager we hired is still with the company. His name's Joe. We were talking about what we should do to try to get our name out there. And I said like, oh, there's some really interesting podcasts. Maybe we try to go and get on some podcasts. And he said, well, actually, why don't we just start one? Because
Excellent.
we don't have, it'll be faster and we can own the narrative. And so, and I said, what should we name it? He said, I looked and the genetics podcast is available. So why don't we take that? It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward.
Plant a flag in the ground,
I love the idea as well. Yeah, and I knew that there was not a podcast at the time for people like me who just wanted to listen to. It's not a pop science like define what genetics is. It's really we're going to go into details and talk about a particular company or a paper or something or somebody's career. And I've loved it because you get to talk to people who are really interesting. We do them weekly now. So I learned so much because we've cast a pretty wide net just beyond genomics into proteomics and anything precision medicine really is in our umbrella now. And like you, I love it because you get to talk to someone who really knows something about some corner of the world that you've probably never even thought loads about. And you get to ask them all the questions that you want to ask. And it's just great. It's a really good way to get to know people as well. If you're a great interviewer and you know how to kind of draw the good stories out of people. But I love when someone's reaction is like, oh, somebody's never asked me that before. I've never thought about it that way. And trying to get beyond the rote questions that people often get in interviews and try to think a little bit creatively and get people talking about something different, because then it's memorable for them and also for the audience. You get something that's a little fresh.
I love that. And I love how niche it is. I love that you can just develop a really strong audience around going deep on science, going deep in papers, going deep on a company and doing an analysis. Like, it's so nice that you can build an audience like that around something you actually enjoy. And I think that's the thing. We did a live version of the Healthtech Podcast last week, and some students came up to me afterwards and they were chatting to me, and a lot of what I was saying, they were asking about like growing an audience and how do you know when it's the right podcast, and like framing a lot around views and listens and downloads and that kind of thing. And it's trying to tell people that, we're, hundreds of episodes in. It's like, you're not going to get that far if you don't actually just enjoy the hour. It doesn't actually matter who's listening then, because what are you aiming for? Are we going to monetize these niche podcasts like through, CPM metrics? No, we're not. It's just not the right way it's going to go down. You've got to enjoy the hour, because isn't that the whole point? You're trying to enjoy the hour because of the downloads. Why not just enjoy the hour because of the content? Like, you don't need to pander to the downloads. There's no need. And so set it up when you win, when no one's listening is kind of the answer. And I love your point about learning, because I think this is so true, that what makes a lot of people good leaders is the fact they are willing to learn, they're willing to listen, they're willing to just appreciate that new information can come in and they can change their mind. It really does make good leaders, because ultimately that's what we're doing as scientists. We're in search of new information, new data that allows us to either prove something or for us to change our minds. And that's okay. That's the beauty of getting somewhere new, somewhere better. And that's kind of the way that I think about it in terms of like my life as well, like, or my job. And what I try and do here is like, when I ask you these questions about, how did you actually start? How do you lead? Like, do you feel like I'm asking these selfishly a lot of the time because I'm trying to learn and grow myself. And I love the fact that people can say things to me and I'm like, I've never thought about it in that way before. Like, yeah, that's funny that you use that analogy because blah, blah, blah. And then I can add that string to my bow. Yeah. And people say this to me quite often actually about, or they ask me, about, the confidence to start SomX, or where did it come from? And I reflected the day that I've spoken to 300 entrepreneurs before that have told me hiring is hard, raising money, don't do it if you don't have to. Like all these concepts that I've just picked up over time that actually, like, when I do run into problems, I often do just know, like I have the answer there because of someone that I've spoken to. I feel mentored by I have this one nebulous mentor, which is like my podcast guests. And so like I too am addicted to learning, but only because I'm addicted to, I guess, just making my life incrementally better each time by feeling slightly less anxious about the next decision or having more data or having more information. And oh man, like the superpower of changing your mind is a powerful one. Like I know it drives Jess, my fiance, mad, but I change my mind very often when I learn new information. So like fiance and co-founder, I should say. That's a whole other story.
The opposite would get you in more trouble, I think.
Indeed.
Never changing your mind.
Indeed. Patrick, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time. If people want to learn more, I can't believe it's gone this quickly, by the way. This has absolutely flown by.
Yeah, I know. I thought the same.
If people want to learn more about Sano Genetics or about you, actually, to learn more about you and your background and how you've got here, what's the best way for them to do so?
Our website is sanogenetics.com. So feel free to reach out. If you're interested in the business, feel free to reach out. We've got intercom and email and all that good stuff. If you want to reach me personally, then I'm just first name at sanogenetics.com. And really happy to hear from anybody. If you're starting a company, just want to chat. If you're a recruiter and you want to help us hire people, we've got in-house talent, but I'm happy to hear from you anyways. It can never hurt. And otherwise, you can find me on Twitter as well. I'm Patrick_J. Can we call it Twitter now? Patrick_J_short. I think it's X, but it was a real pleasure to be here. You're a long time listener, first time guest, as they say, but it's been really great, and appreciate you having me on.